Hey everybody, Gary here with Guitar Tricks, and in this video I want to talk about and demonstrate the differences between solid state amps and tube amps. I want to help you decide which one is right for you. I've got with me a vintage Fender 30 blackface tube amp and a Roland Cube 30 solid state amp. I've had both of these amps for a long time and I love them both for different reasons, which we're going to go over. Before we get into the video, please go ahead and click subscribe so that you get all the latest and greatest content from Guitar Tricks. So first, let's go over a few reasons why people love tube amps. So the first reason is, as long as it's a really good tube amp, meaning it's made with quality components, has a nice solid housing, a good speaker, the sound is going to be very natural and transparent. It's not a digital sound in any way. It's a natural sound going through that circuit, through those tubes, and you're going to get a true tone. Now, once you record something and then put it into an MP3 form or digitize it anyway, that might get lost in translation, but it's something that firsthand, when you're in the room with the amp, you could really hear that. So if you're hoping that this YouTube video is going to demonstrate that, it's really not. If you search through YouTube, comparison between solid state and tube, and you listen to these A/B tests, even within this own video, you're gonna have a hard time hearing that quality because it's being turned into an MP4 and then it's going through YouTube and they're gonna compress it. That's gonna affect the sound. It's something that when you're in the room with the amp and you're hearing it back to you, that you could really feel. It's the same with like an acoustic guitar. If you're holding it and you're in that space with the guitar, it has a sound that kind of gets lost once you record it and put it into a sound file. That's the kind of thing I would encourage you to experience for yourself by going to a guitar store, plugging into a couple tube amps, plugging into a couple solid state amps, and seeing if you could hear that difference. The second reason is that a tube amp is generally way more powerful and loud than a solid state amp. So for instance, this Fender 30 that I have here, it weighs about, 50 pounds, I would say, whereas my Roland Cube 30, both rated as 30-watt amps, maybe weighs half of that, 20 to 25 pounds. It's more heavy duty. The housing is made of solid wood, and something about those heavy duty transformers and the tubes and everything, it just cuts through. It's loud. 30 watts of tube to me is like 150 watts of solid state. So if you're looking for a really powerful amp, generally tube amps are going to do that. Now the third reason is the most irrefutable. This is not really open to interpretation or opinion. It's a fact that with a tube amp, when you start to turn the volume up and push the capacity of the tube amp, you get this natural saturation or overdrive, a little bit of distortion and compression that happens with the amp. And that can become part of the musicality of your playing. It kind of becomes part of your instrument. So when you push it, it actually starts to sound better. Whereas with a solid state amp, when you push the capacity, it starts to clip, it starts to sound distorted. It's not a musical thing. So at low volumes, the two amps are going to be way more comparable. But when you push a tube amp, something magical happens that is not going to happen on a solid state amp. However, in this day and age, there's all sorts of pedals and modeling and things like that that can give you that sort of sound without having the tube amp. Now, some people also refer to that as a dynamic response. And I remember that was one of the first things I experienced when I got my first Hot Rod Deluxe, Fender Hot Rod Deluxe when I was a teenager after having a solid state amp, was that the amp really responded to the nuance in my playing, just the variation in volume. I could play something really soft, and then I could dig in, and it would really catch the dynamics. The fourth reason is just the nostalgia and the cultural legacy. So many of our guitar heroes from the 60s and 70s, they use tube amps, whether it's Fender or Marshall. And if it was good enough for our guitar heroes, it's good enough for us, and there's no reason to change it. So for the same reason that we all want Stratocasters and Les Pauls because our heroes played those, our heroes also used these old tube amps, and that's also part of it. And then another reason is that along with the natural sound coming from the tubes, there's usually spring reverb in tube amps, a reverb tank with springs, and that kind of natural spring reverb with the natural tube sound is just something to behold, especially, like I said, if you're in the room with it and you're hearing that. Now, what are the reasons why you might want a solid state amp? Well, one is that they require little maintenance and they're generally more reliable. This Cube 30 amp, I've had it since, I don't know, 2003, 2004. No problems, never. There's nothing to maintain. I don't have to replace the tubes, don't have to set the bias. There's no glass parts in there, things that could rattle around. It's just more reliable, but it's a high quality one. I'm sure a lot of solid state amps, even the inputs are probably very cheap and the circuit boards. So this doesn't go for all amps. I'm kind of comparing a high quality tube versus a high quality solid state. So just in general, if you get a good solid state amp, expect to do no maintenance on it. If it works, it works. The second thing is that they usually have more options to shape your sound. Built-in modeling, built-in effects, a tuner on board. They just have so much on there. So my Cube 30, it has 8 different amp models to get different sounds, different EQ, different levels of distortion. It's got a flanger, chorus, tremolo, delay, reverb, all that stuff, so I could just kind of turn the knob and get a new sound. And obviously this is especially great for practicing, because if you're learning different songs and you want different sounds, you don't have to hook up a pedal board. You can just use your amp and, futz around with the controls to get the sound that you're looking for. The third reason why you might want a solid state amp is just that they're lighter, easier to transport, and you don't have to be quite as careful because, like I said, there's not as much on it that could break down. And the fourth reason why you might prefer a tube amp is that they're great at low volumes. With a lot of tube amps, it kind of goes from like 0 to 8 really quickly. That kind of in between where you're at a low, comfortable bedroom volume is hard unless it's a very small tube amp. Whereas on a loud solid state amp, even though it can go very loud to a gigging volume, you could also get it to sound good at a low volume. So there's just more range. And it generally also sounds good at a low volume. It'll sound just as good. Whereas a tube amp, at that low volume, it's like, it doesn't really sound very good. You really need to kind of turn that volume up to get that sound out of the tube amp. So the last thing I want to talk about when considering if you want a tube amp or solid state is what you're going to use it for. So 3 applications we can talk about are live performance, recording, and practice. So for so many people that are playing live, they're keeping their amplifier volume really low and they're just miking the amplifier, and the majority of the volume that's in the room for the guitar is actually from the PA speakers. So it's basically solid state at that point. You're just taking a sound from a tube amplifier, but you're putting it through the house speaker system, which is not a tube system. So then it's less about the amp itself, and it's more just about that final sound through the PA speakers. So you see a lot of people now using very small amplifiers for live performance. I think Jeff Beck actually uses like a little Fender Champ. It is a tube amp, but that's what he uses to play for a whole stadium because they're just miking that little amp and it's going through. With that in mind, you just want to find an amp at any volume that you like the sound of with your pedals. Just if you like the sound of it, no matter what amp it is, you can mic it and it's going to sound good. So if you are most of the time going to be mic'd or going through the PA system, then a solid state would be fine and sometimes more preferable, because a lot of these new solid state amps, the sound before it goes into the speakers is already optimized. And with a lot of these new systems, you can just do a line out from the amplifier itself to the speakers instead of even miking the amplifier. So whereas a tube amp, you're kind of reliant on getting that sound from the whole package, from the speaker and everything. With a lot of these solid states, you're going to get the exact same sound just by bypassing any speaker and going straight into the house PA system and into the monitors. Now, if you're playing in live situations where your amp is the only source of volume, and if you're playing with a full band, with a drummer especially, then it's probably going to be a safer bet to get a tube amp, because that tube amp is going to really cut through the mix and give you that power that you're looking for out of just one thing without miking it. Now for recording, a lot of people are bypassing amplifiers altogether because in this day and age, everything is becoming digitized anyway. It's going to go through a digital computer software, turn into an MP3, and so on and so forth. So to be a purist about tube sound doesn't really make any sense because it's going through all this processing anyway. So just either going directly into your computer or miking any amp that you like the sound of at any volume is going to be fine. So that's all about experimentation and finding the sound you like. miking a tube is not necessarily going to sound better than miking a solid state, which is not necessarily going to sound better than going directly into your computer. And in this day and age, there's so much software for taking a guitar signal and creating all sorts of sounds using that signal. One of my favorite young guitar players, his name is Tom Misch, records everything DI, which just means direct in, to his computer. And if you listen to his records, his tone is to die for, and there's no amplifier at all. And just as a final thought, I just want to warn you against spending too much time obsessing over gear, because no matter what guitar you have, what amplifier, what pedals, whatever, they're not going to make you a better player or even necessarily make you sound good. Whereas someone that put all the time into playing and becoming a great player, no matter which amplifier or pedals or guitar they play, they are going to sound good. So find the sound you're looking for, find an amp that inspires you, find a guitar that makes you want to pick it up and play, but don't spend too much time going down that rabbit hole because it is deep and you could get lost. I have plenty of times. With that in mind, have fun, happy playing, and I'll see you guys next time.